Hello, I'm Katie Somerville, Senior Curator of Fashion and Textiles at the National Gallery of Victoria. Welcome to Triennial Conversation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we're gathered, the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This talk is part of a series of conversations presented alongside the NGV Triennial, a major exhibition of contemporary art and design from across the world, featuring over 100 artists and designers. It is a pleasure to be here in front of Alice Pott's project featured in the NGV Triennial, titled Dance, Biodegradable Personal Protective Equipment, DBPPE, Post-COVID Face Masks, and to have the opportunity to discuss the development of this incredible work in collaboration with MIMCO. I'd like to welcome our speakers this evening, Alice Potts, of course, joining us from London, SOPHIE BEGG from MIMCO here in Melbourne, and Karen Webster from LCI, also here in Melbourne. To start, I'll just give you a brief background to each of our panellists, and then we'll go straight into some questions. Alice Potts is a material innovator and biofabrication designer who graduated with an MA at the Royal College of Art in London and independently develops a combination of sustainable and biological-based materials. She's best recognised for her sweat crystallisation works that turned human sweat into biocrystal for use in art and design projects. In 2018, Alice received a fellowship from the Onassis Foundation in Athens and was named one of London's most influential people in the category of business, fashion and beauty at the Progress 1000 Gala. She's currently head biomaterial designer at Modern Synthesis in London. Our other guest is SOPHIE BEGG. She's senior jewellery designer at MIMCO, and she has a background in 3D object and jewellery design and studied at Central St Martin's College of Art in London. She then completed a Bachelor of Fine Arts at Sydney College of Fine Art, University of New South Wales, and SOPHIE comes to us with a strong interest in jewellery and ceramics and with a love of object design. And finally, Karen Webster, who is the Principal and Dean of LCI Melbourne, a progressive higher education institute specialising in art and design. Karen is well known in the creative industries with more than 4 decades of experience in roles including Festival Director at Melbourne Fashion Festival, Design Director at Buzz, and Senior Leadership roles at RMIT University. We're delighted to have all of you here. So Alice, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to start really with the obvious. We'd love to know more about these incredible 20 bioplastic face masks made from food waste. If you could just tell us even where you started with this project and where along the way, thanks to COVID, the creative process ended up taking you.
So obviously at the beginning, we were focusing on a Perspire project. So that was our sort of main outcome for the National Gallery of Victoria. And when COVID hit, we wanted to do something which was like based on the here and now. And I think for me, it really challenged how I could use what was happening in a current situation with my knowledge of biomaterials into developing something which was radical, but also actually combated the years of development of how we'd been trying to tackle single-use plastic. And I think especially I can sort of say at the forefront of England, when we first went into our initial lockdown, there was this whole change of our environment where all cars stopped running, everyone was having to shop locally, and the world finally grew. And we were all sort of inside, like watching the plants like overtake us and the like CO2 emissions stop and break down. And I think that was like the first opportunity where you suddenly start to realize that actually the world needed that time to regrow and replenish. But obviously a lot of issues came when we ended up having to go outside, and there was a mass production of single-use plastic used again, because people didn't know how COVID was cross-contaminated. And this whole sort of 3 months that we'd had of like allowing the world to rebuild was suddenly being undone, basically. And so that's when I worked with the National Gallery and MIMCO on like looking at how we can use technology, biomaterials and nature, and then also the pandemic, to make and tackle this idea of single-use plastic, and how actually there is this fine balance of technology and biomaterials that can be used, from 3D printing to nature, and to create these really, really beautiful pieces.
And there was also quite a personal catalyst, I think, Alice, wasn't there, in some respects, for making you even focus in on PPE in particular?
Yeah, so my twin brother is a paramedic and is frontline for the NHS. And I think I can honestly say England was a very slow lockdown at the beginning. And I think because it came so dramatically in the UK, that when it came down to having access, especially for the NHS, of PPE, we were just completely out of stock. And I think it was one of those things where there's this hopelessness that I think a lot of me and my family felt when we were getting phone calls and the frontliners, such as the paramedics, didn't have any access to PPE, and they didn't have face masks or protective gear. And I think that's when me and my mum particularly started actually doing, first of all, material face masks. So I know a lot of people were making them and selling them on, but me and my mum were making them and donating them to care homes, didn't have any at the time, the homeless. There was a lot of children's wards that didn't have access as well. And I think that's where the whole initial of like what sort of face masks do need to be applied, and what scenarios do they actually needed to be in. And I think that was my first sort of initial instinct of like how we actually, as everyday people, don't need the same medical grade PPE as the ones who are frontliners, and actually how biomaterials could be introduced for everyday use, where it's only a single use of that material. And that's working alongside National Gallery and MIMCO. The idea started to sort of push forward.
And there's the sort of biomaterials and the food waste itself, but I think it's really beautiful, the idea of, during that period, you literally kind of harvesting wildflowers and organic material from your local neighbourhood and incorporating those into these pieces. So there's a very real connection with your immediate, very restricted environment at the time too.
Because I think that's one of the big things that I always focus on in biomaterials, is that, I mean, I don't make a big statement that they are, but a lot of biomaterials are beige and there's not a lot of colour always introduced into sustainability. And I think that was the one thing where I was lucky enough to be working on this project for around 8 months, and that did cover spring, summer and autumn, which for me are some of the most colourful seasons. And I think also from my time in Greece, where I did do a lot of research on pigmentation and how they naturally made pigments from the earth, that for me, especially also coming from fashion, it was a nice opportunity to be like, how do you create a color scheme which is seasonal, which is actually based on your local seasons. And that really pushed me to focus on actually what are the flowers and what are the colors available, and how do you turn these into pigments to really translate the seasons of your area. And I think that was the most sort of exciting time for me, was that I could really capture the seasons of London and push that through into the face masks.
No, it's beautiful. And I think that, as you say, that surprise element of just how pretty they can be just by introducing this really stunning palette which is derived from nature. Could I just go back a step and just get you to talk about how you went from studying an MA in women's wear accessories, effectively, right when you started your course, to becoming this incredible material scientist, experimenting with sweat and petals and really sort of pushing the boundaries of what's possible. I mean, at what point during your studies did you have sort of a shift in thinking, or what was behind that?
I think I'd always wanted to do fashion, because for me there is this like amazing opportunity that fashion has always been for me a second skin, and there's this contact of the human body which I don't think you ever get in a lot of other subjects. But I mean, I come from a background of maths, chemistry, and psychology, and I went sort of massively diverted into fashion with no background knowledge. And I was very lucky in how well I did in my BA, and I won a graduate textiles award in London. And I think that fear of doing a master's, because I didn't feel that I knew who I was, that when I went to do my MA at Royal College of Art, I was extremely open-minded to the possibilities of trying to discover who I was. And it was actually a very lucky coincidence that I got into biomaterials, because we had an arts bar and there was a different course basically talking about a project where they were having to do this 9-month biodesign challenge with a lady called Helene Steiner. And I remember hearing about it, and it was this idea that it was actually based on food, and it was like how they could change the systems between using this balance of design and nature. And I remember just like trying to understand it, and I was like, because a lot of us use nature as a visual stimulus, and that's how we push our nature into the work we do. And the more these people were talking about it, it was this idea that actually, if nature has taken thousands of years to design, why are we trying to replicate it? Why aren't we using the new technology we have today to basically either biomimic, to replicate, or to utilize these natural designs into our practices? And so I emailed the tutor and talked to my personal tutor, and they allowed me to take it on as an extra course. And I just never looked back. Like, I think I was probably one of the most eager people in that course. And Helena, who was head of the project, just took me on under her wing and taught me everything. She introduced me to scientists from around the world, to architects. And it was this first platform where I'd worked on, and it was a community. And it wasn't about being just only in fashion, but it was about working with a whole team and using all of your knowledge just to create this one idea. And I just felt like I fitted in. Like, it just, everything of why I wanted to do what I wanted to do just made sense. And yeah, just never looked back.
Well, that's a great way to describe it. And in terms of, I guess, where you're at now, sort of still looking forward, very much looking forward, just wondered from your perspective, you know, what you see as the main challenges and indeed the main opportunities that come with working with biomaterials. I'm sure there's plenty of frustrations and sort of failures that sometimes turn into, you know, opportunities. It'd be nice to hear your perspective on that.
I think in terms of the fashion industry, and it's extremely hard. Like, I think there's this one area where it's like you sit so in between fashion and science that actually the support and the funding opportunities is really, really difficult, because as any sort of fashion funding goes in the UK, you have to have these 5 years of fashion collections, all your stock intakes, and how well you've done to be able to apply to show that you have progressed. And then obviously for science, a lot of it is medical based, where they want medical research and development into it. So I think as a startup, trying to get the initial funding to move also from sort of like an art-based product into like an actual project is really, really difficult. And then I think also now sort of working in the fashion industry, it's one of these new words and one of these new like taboos where obviously I can only sort of speak for England, but there's not currently in the fashion system a lot of guidelines to what counts as sustainable. So I think there's been a lot of research for me, especially starting this new job, where actually it can be up to 1% of a material can be sustainable and it's allowed to be called sustainable. And I think for biomaterials especially is that they just take a lot longer to develop, and fashion is still very in this fast fashion system where everything needs to be produced now and everything needs to be produced in a week or two. But also the biggest issues I've had is getting the materials to reach the standard almost of man-made materials. And it would surprise a lot of people that that is a big demand within the fashion industry, is that they want a material that will degrade but has the same longevity as a man-made. And it's just a very, very tricky thing because biomaterials do take to develop around 10 to 15 years. And I think it's just having that constant support and that realization that the system also just needs to change.
No, it's fascinating. It sounds like incredible sort of tightrope that you're walking, really, between the sort of tensions of what the industry demands and what is important to pursue within the work itself. One other thing I was interested to hear about is, in addition to the fantastic work here on display at the NGV Triennial, you also collaborated with MIMCO to create a limited edition capsule jewellery collection using upcycled materials from MIMCO's own archives and your own sequins created from biomaterials. I'd love to just hear your reflections on this collaboration and how you managed to work together, but also particularly from the other side of the world and during a pandemic.
I mean, I'm not going to blow Sophie's trump a lot, but I absolutely loved it. It was one of the most amazing, because I've had previous collaborations, and honestly, to have a company that allowed you time and was patient and almost understood the materials, for me was like one of the biggest changes. Because I mean, we worked for 6 or 7 months on the development of these, but also to have the freedom of allowing the materials to be what the materials are. But it was a massive eye-opener for me to like see the advances. I mean, I hate online platforms, but you sort of get used to them now. But it was like an amazing experience to see that actually the advances in our technology allowed us to work from the other side of the world, and still didn't ruin how the design outcome came or how the final pieces looked. And I think that was one of the most exciting, is that if you just find a really good partnership and a really good collaboration, it's just a relief to know that there's not anything that can actually ruin it or destroy it. And yeah, I loved every minute of it. And I'm sure I'll be trying to force myself to, or you guys, to work with me again.
Well, that's probably a lovely moment to bring Sophie into the conversation, if I may. And I might sort of likewise, in a way, ask you, Sophie, to describe, from your point of view, the process of creating this jewellery collection with Alice, because it probably would have taken you, both of you, in your own way, outside of your normal working practice and different approaches. So it'd be lovely to hear your perspective.
So funny enough, it did and it didn't. In one way, it was this amazing return to craft in that everything was hands-on.
Yeah, beautiful.
You know, you could consider each piece as an individual. You really had to work with it. There was a lot of problem solving, and a real sort of blessing of COVID was that you had the time, in some ways, to be inside and to be consumed by it. I think for anyone that doesn't know, at MIMCO we do a few collections each year which we call One of a Kind, which is an upcycled project where It's development samples, it's things we can't put into production. It's also from our archive of materials, things we have on hand. So it's pieces that are made from only upcycled materials. So nothing is purpose-made or produced for them. So anyway, we had that project, and then when we sort of found out what Alice was doing, we wanted to combine it and see if there was a way to utilise those materials as a major component of the pieces. Yeah, look, it really was an amazing project.
But I'm assuming there must have been some challenges too, I guess, in working that way, or like perhaps in maybe thinking about what you want to carry forward out of something like this and what's possible.
Yeah, look, I think challenges in terms of the project, and then I guess challenges of trying to expand on this in the future and trying to scale something like this. I think that is obviously the biggest challenge, and Alice has touched on the fact that in fashion we have timelines. We have a production schedule, and we have a responsibility to a consumer to produce things that are reliable, that will last a certain amount of time. And I think our passion and drive is definitely there for it. It's a big education piece, particularly for a brand like us. We are still quite a mainstream high street brand that a lot of people buy into. So getting people to accept these sorts of materials and appreciate them the way we do can be challenging for things like durability. Although I will actually say these materials in particular, and Alice will remember me emailing her, what happens if I heat them? What happens if I leave them out in the sun? What happens if they get wet? They were amazing. They behaved the same way as a resin, which was that they actually were really durable. So I think for me, there is definitely hope, and I really hope that we can productionise these materials in the future and utilise them.
That was my next question, is, on the other end of the spectrum, what you can say to us at the moment, at least anyway, about your plans to explore this area more and to work, I guess, increasingly with some of these alternative materials and sort of methods.
It's definitely there. It's a hard thing to commit to because, again, there's sort of this timeline which you can't pin down. I mean, even in our project, I think Alice and I drove some people nuts refusing to pin down a timeline, but it worked really well for us. It was a great process, but it's a hard one.
Check back with you in 8 months, maybe. Is that the?
And I think it's getting suppliers as well. It's getting suppliers to rely on the material as well and get them to work with it. I think we are in a reality of a commercial world where things, again, is, can we afford to use these materials and educate our customer to appreciate them as well.
Oh, it sounds really exciting. Yeah, absolutely. Karen, I'd probably like to bring you in at this point and go a bit big picture, if that's all right. One of the things that you pick up listening to Alice and Sophie is, I guess, the power of cross-pollinisation, whether it's kind of within an industry or outside of, the usual suspects. So just that interdisciplinary practice and what kind of role you feel that has within the creative arts and design area.
Well, I feel pretty strongly that it's actually the future of creative industries, but probably more specifically, scientists and designers and artists are problem solvers. They love a challenge. They love creating something that's unique and different. So to separate off the concept of science and art, it just doesn't work. We want to actually work together. We want to actually solve the problems of the world. We're very much driven by the issues that are impacting us all. And if you get creative and strategic minds working with the highest level strategic minds, we're going to have fantastic results. So I think more of it. I also think, why work in a silo? The notion that you can only be in one space, we only need to be looking around the National Gallery of Victoria and seeing the breadth of the work generally doesn't fit in one particular space. Is it fashion or is it art? Is it interiors or is it, you know, industrial design? Where does it sit? And does it even matter anymore? So if we're really going to be about developing new concepts, we need to cross-pollinate. We need to actually be opening up our minds and learning from each other, you know. I know the saying's been said before, but collaboration is the new black, you know. It's where it sits. And I'm so impressed by how you guys have worked together. It's phenomenal. The outcomes are fantastic.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm really interested to hear you share your perspective on the role of sustainable practice in design and production, because I know you struggle with that word, so go
if
for
I
it.
had a
Tell us
choice,
more.
if I had my choice, I'd ban the word sustainability. Alice kind of touched on it before when, you know, how do you even define it? Do people even know what it is? But by virtue of definition, we can no longer sustain. When the concept of sustainability first evolved back last century in the end of the 1980s, maybe then we could have sustained what we were doing, but we have been so phenomenally destructive in the way that we've treated our world. And, you know, to your comments around the notion of fast fashion, we're producing so much stuff across a number of industries. There's such a phenomenal amount of waste. We can't afford to sustain. If we continue to sustain, we're going to actually destroy our world. So we've got to now disrupt. We've got to turn backwards. We've got to reverse some of these concepts. We've actually got to look at new ways of doing things. And, you know, at LCI where I'm working, we talk about responsible innovation. And I know some people like Nike talk about considered design, but the notion of it should be innovative, but it should be everything we should do should be done through the lens of responsibility. Responsibility for the people that we're creating for and who it's created by, responsibility for our environment, responsibilities for culture, and the whole ethics that underpins it. And we should tick the box across all of those areas if we're going to be designers and artists into the future.
Into the future, another big question. From your perspective, I guess specifically working in the education space and taking into consideration the extraordinary challenges that we've all borne witness to and continue to see unfold around us, what opportunities do you identify for the next generation? Because I guess you're one of the people working so closely with those, you know, next generation of creative minds, and how do you see them translating what could be quite almost a burdensome situation into one that's actually kind of energised and positive?
Well, I'm privileged because I'm working with the next generation. You know, you listen to Alice speaking about the impact of having someone being exposed to an experience when you're at RCA, and how just sometimes the meeting of minds or meeting someone who inspires you shifts your whole trajectory. And that's the purpose that I have in education, is to expose the students to as much thinking as possible. You know, before lockdown, we were talking to the National Gallery about having Alice come and do a residency with us, which we still want to do one day, so that Alice can inspire this generation. But this is an incredible generation that is coming through, and we should be really, really proud. They're change makers. They are mobilised, they're politicised. They're a little annoyed with the way that we've left the world, but actually now they want to make a difference. They don't complain, they actually are positive and have purpose. And it really is a thrill to be working with students who can see what the future holds, and then rather than hiding in a corner about it, they're saying, we've got to do something. And we're seeing it on the streets, we're seeing it across the world. Whatever the issues are, they're standing up and saying, we don't want to take this anymore. And that kind of thinking, that kind of confidence, there's a boldness to it, is going to make a difference. So we're really, really fortunate we've got a generation coming through that are really exciting and collaborating and doing fantastic things.
Yeah, Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's sort of in spite of things, there seems to be...
Well, the last 12 months has taught resilience, persistence, take on a challenge, what can you do with the things around you? And the outcomes have been phenomenal. So, yeah, good luck to... It's great, inspiring.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, thank you all so much for answering my questions, probing questions. It's just great to hear all your perspectives, I suppose particularly in relation to your work, Alice, but more generally into what we all as human beings need to be thinking about at this present moment. I do want to acknowledge and thank particular people who helped to make this project possible, and that is of course the generosity of supporter MIMCO, and also triennial supporters Chris and Dawn Fleischner. So thank you to them. And thank you for joining me here. It's been fantastic to find out more about this project and indeed about the collaboration. And the triennial, of course, will be open until the 18th of April, should you want to come and see this fantastic project at the gallery. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.